The environmental factors contributing to the rise of diabetes. Diabetes is a chronic disease that affects millions of people around the world. According to the World Health Organization, the number of people living with diabetes has quadrupled since 1980, and it now affects over 422 million adults worldwide. The impact of diabetes is enormous, both on individuals and societies as a whole. People with diabetes are at risk of developing complications such as heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, and blindness, and the disease is responsible for more than 4 million deaths every year. Diabetes also imposes a significant economic burden, with healthcare costs and lost productivity estimated to be in the trillions of dollars annually. While genetics play a role in the development of diabetes, environmental factors are increasingly recognized as important contributors to the rise of the disease. In this video, we'll explore the various environmental factors that are linked to the development of diabetes and discuss what individuals and societies can do to reduce their impact. By understanding the role of the environment in the development of diabetes, we can take steps to prevent the disease and improve the health and well-being of people around the world. Air pollution has been shown to have a significant impact on the development and progression of diabetes. Several studies have found a correlation between exposure to air pollution and an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. For example, a study published in The Lancet Planetary Health found that exposure to fine particulate matter, PM2.5, was associated with an increased risk of diabetes. The study, which analyzed data from 1.7 million adults in the United States, found that for every increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter in PM2.5 exposure, the risk of diabetes increased by 15%. Other studies have also found a correlation between air pollution and diabetes risk. A study conducted in Germany found that people who lived in areas with high levels of air pollution were more likely to develop type 2 diabetes, even after adjusting for other risk factors such as age, sex, and body mass index. Similarly, a study conducted in China found that exposure to high levels of air pollution was associated with an increased risk of diabetes in both men and women. In addition to increasing the risk of developing diabetes, air pollution can also worsen the disease in those who already have it. For example, a study published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives found that exposure to air pollution can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease in people with diabetes. The study, which analyzed data from over 1,100 adults with diabetes in the United States, found that exposure to high levels of nitrogen dioxide, NO2, and PM2.5 was associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Furthermore, research has suggested that air pollution may trigger genetic mechanisms that contribute to the development of diabetes. A study published in the journal Diabetes found that exposure to diesel exhaust particles can increase insulin resistance, a key factor in the development of type 2 diabetes, in mice that are genetically susceptible to the disease. In conclusion, there is a growing body of evidence to suggest that air pollution plays a significant role in the development and progression of diabetes. Studies have shown a correlation between exposure to air pollution and an increased risk of diabetes, as well as the worsening of the disease in those who already have it. Additionally, air pollution may trigger genetic mechanisms that contribute to the development of diabetes. Water pollution is another environmental factor that can contribute to the development of diabetes. Exposure to certain toxins in water can lead to insulin resistance, which is a key factor in the development of type 2 diabetes. For example, exposure to arsenic, a naturally occurring element that can contaminate water sources, has been linked to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. A study published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives found that exposure to high levels of arsenic in drinking water was associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes in a population in Bangladesh. The study, which followed over 10,000 participants for up to 12 years, found that those who were exposed to the highest levels of arsenic had a 2.6 times greater risk of developing diabetes compared to those with lower exposure. Another study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that exposure to perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, a chemical used in the production of non-stick coatings, was associated with an increased risk of diabetes. The study, which analyzed data from over 4,000 adults in the United States, found that those with the highest levels of PFOA in their blood had a 1.7 times greater risk of developing diabetes compared to those with lower levels. Exposure to pollutants in water sources can also contribute to the development of diabetes in certain communities. For example, a study conducted in the United States found that residents of a community in West Virginia who were exposed to high levels of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, in their drinking water had a higher prevalence of diabetes compared to those in a nearby community with lower exposure. The study, which analyzed data from over 1,000 adults, found that the prevalence of diabetes was 14% higher in the community with higher PCB exposure. In conclusion, exposure to certain toxins in water can lead to the development of diabetes. Arsenic and PFOA are examples of toxins that have been linked to an increased risk of diabetes, while exposure to PCBs has been associated with a higher prevalence of the disease in certain communities. The impact of water pollution on diabetes highlights the need for stricter regulations and better monitoring of water sources to protect public health. Chemical exposure is another environmental factor that can contribute to the development of diabetes. Exposure to pesticides, phthalates, and other chemicals has been linked to an increased risk of developing the disease. A study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that exposure to the pesticide dichlorodiphenyl dichloroethylene, DDE, was associated with an increased risk of diabetes. The study, which followed over 3,000 adults in the United States for up to 23 years, found that those with the highest levels of DDE in their blood had a 60% greater risk of developing diabetes compared to those with lower levels. Phthalates, a group of chemicals commonly used in the production of plastics, have also been linked to an increased risk of diabetes. A study published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives found that exposure to certain phthalates was associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes in women. The study, which analyzed data from over 2,000 women in the United States, found that those with the highest levels of certain phthalates in their urine had a 70% greater risk of developing diabetes compared to those with lower levels. Other chemicals, such as bisphenol A, BPA, a chemical used in the production of certain plastics, have also been linked to an increased risk of diabetes. A study published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives found that exposure to BPA was associated with an increased risk of diabetes in adults. The study, which analyzed data from over 2,800 adults in the United States, found that those with the highest levels of BPA in their urine had a 50% greater risk of developing diabetes compared to those with lower levels. Exposure to these and other chemicals highlights the need for stricter regulations and better monitoring to protect public health. The impact of chemical exposure on diabetes underscores the importance of understanding and addressing the environmental factors that contribute to the development of this disease. In conclusion, exposure to certain chemicals, such as DDE, phthalates, and BPA, has been linked to an increased risk of diabetes. These findings emphasize the importance of reducing exposure to harmful chemicals and the need for better regulations to protect public health. Climate change is another environmental factor that can have significant impacts on diabetes. Changes in temperature and precipitation patterns can lead to extreme weather events such as heat waves, floods, and droughts, which can disrupt access to healthy food and medical care, and lead to an increased risk of diabetes. A study published in the journal The Lancet Planetary Health found that climate change is projected to increase the prevalence of diabetes globally by 7.9% by 2050. The study estimates that this will result in over 130 million new cases of diabetes worldwide, with the greatest increase expected in low and middle income countries. Extreme weather events can also have a direct impact on the risk of developing diabetes. For example, a study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that exposure to heat waves was associated with an increased risk of diabetes. The study, which analyzed data from over 100,000 adults in the United States, found that those exposed to extreme heat had a higher risk of developing diabetes compared to those who were not exposed. Climate change can also disrupt access to healthy food and medical care, which can increase the risk of developing diabetes. A study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that individuals living in areas affected by natural disasters, such as hurricanes or floods, had an increased risk of developing diabetes due to disrupted access to healthy food and medical care. These findings emphasize the need for action to address the impacts of climate change on diabetes. This includes efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate the effects of climate change, as well as programs and policies to support access to healthy food and medical care in the face of extreme weather events. In conclusion, climate change can have significant impacts on diabetes, including increasing the risk of developing the disease through exposure to extreme weather events and disrupting access to healthy food and medical care. The need for action to address these impacts is urgent and requires a comprehensive and coordinated response from individuals, communities, and policymakers. In conclusion, the rise of diabetes is a complex issue with a multitude of factors at play. However, environmental factors play a significant role in the development and progression of the disease. Air pollution, water pollution, exposure to chemicals, and climate change all contribute to an increased risk of diabetes. It's important to recognize that we can take action to reduce our exposure to these environmental toxins. This includes taking steps to reduce air pollution in our communities, supporting efforts to ensure safe drinking water, choosing organic foods to avoid exposure to pesticides and other chemicals, and advocating for policies that protect the environment and public health. Moreover, addressing environmental factors is crucial to effectively combat diabetes. By taking steps to reduce our exposure to environmental toxins, we can help prevent the development of the disease in ourselves and our communities. Additionally, supporting policies that promote a healthy environment and protect public health can have a significant impact on reducing the incidence of diabetes. Overall, the fight against diabetes requires a comprehensive approach that addresses both individual and environmental factors. By taking action to reduce our exposure to environmental toxins and advocating for policies that protect the environment and public health, we can make a significant impact in the fight against diabetes. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe our channel.